what fraction of the human race today lives in free societies?
Tiny, tiny, tiny percentage.
Over history, what fraction at any moment of time ever lived in free societies?
Even tinier.
Even tinier.
Our country, uniquely for the time, was founded on mistrust for the government.
Everything in the Bill of Rights, every single aspect of it, was never a restriction on the individual citizen. It never told me what I couldn't do. Everything in the Bill of Rights tells the government what it can't do to restrict my freedom.
You and I, who have been lucky enough to have been born in a free society, take freedom for granted as if it's a natural phenomenon.
The powers that we've delegated to the federal government are few and well-defined and restricted mostly to external affairs. The powers left with the people in the state are indefinite and numerous. If you turn that upside down, we have what we have now. The powers of the federal government are indefinite and numerous.
We do not maintain the essential features of the society which made that freedom and prosperities possible. There isn't a wide range of alternatives. We go to misery and tyranny, to the normal state of mankind.
Hace casi 200 años, un grupo notable de hombres se congregó en esta habitación para escribir una constitución para la nueva nación que habían ayudado a crear unos pocos años antes. Eran un grupo de gente sabia, culta y preparada. Habían aprendido una lección de la historia que dice: el gran peligro para la libertad es la concentración del poder. Estaban decididos a proteger a los ciudadanos de los nuevos Estados Unidos de América contra ese peligro. Esa constitución nos ha servido bien, nos ha permitido conservar nuestra libertad durante 200 años. Pero en los últimos 50 años hemos estado olvidando la lección que los hombres sabios conocían también.
Se fundamenta en los principios de justicia social, democracia, eficiencia, libre competencia, protección del ambiente, productividad y solidaridad. Ahí están los fundamentos. A los fines de asegurar el desarrollo humano integral. Esto solo es posible, es lo que yo iba a decir, en el socialismo.
Public colleges and universities tuition free.
Ordinary citizens know that I'll do everything in my power to protect the underprivileged, the underpaid, and the underfed.
Al considerar al gobierno como una amenaza para nuestra libertad, hemos llegado más y más a considerarlo como un benefactor del cual emanan todas las cosas buenas. Hemos asignado cada vez más tareas de gran importancia al gobierno. Le hemos entregado una fracción cada vez mayor de nuestra renta para que la gaste por nuestra cuenta. Y todos pueden ver los resultados. Son desilusionantes. Las grandes expectativas no se han logrado. Y nuestras libertades han sufrido en el proceso.
Two ways to acquire wealth. I mean, you can work for it, you can produce something that your fellow man wants, you can produce some service, or you can steal it from him. I mean, that's basically it. Those are the two ways. They're mutually exclusive. You can get it voluntarily, or you can steal it. And given that human beings prefer to get the things they want by means of the least possible exertion, well, they're going to prefer to going to the government, getting the government to loot their neighbor.
¿Cómo vamos a financiar este plan? Es el impuesto a las grandes fortunas. En Bolivia, este impuesto logra el aporte del 0,01% de la población, que tiene mucho más dinero para poder aliviar a los que más necesitan en esta crisis.
Who is society? We are. Man can be permitted to exist only in order to serve others. He must be nothing but a tool for the satisfaction of their needs.
Almost all of the wealth and much of the income is going to the people on top.
El poder adquisitivo de los argentinos cayó 40% desde el año 2013 para acá. 40%. La debacle de Argentina es enorme. El sector privado está cada vez más chiquitito y cada vez le ponen más impuestos y siguen insistiendo. Este propio gobierno le siguió poniendo una cantidad de impuestos nuevos al sector privado. Aún en pandemia, cuando en todo el mundo tratan de ayudar al sector privado, a los que les obligaste a cerrar las empresas, acá no, acá agregaron impuestos, realmente han hecho una tragedia económica y ya cada vez tenés menos a quién sacarle y el resultado del otro lado fue un aumento fenomenal de la pobreza. Entonces es evidente que este sistema no funciona.
Don't look now, young man, but somebody has his hand in your pocket. It's the hand of big government. It's taking away about 4 months' pay from what your daddy earns every year. $1 out of every 3 in his paycheck.
With an innocent-sounding constitutional amendment, the 16th, which says that Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes on incomes from whatever source derived. And we forgot to put any limit on the extent to which we could tax ourselves. Conceivably, we could be taxed out of all private property. We could be taxed not 70%, 80%, 90%, but 100%. We could awaken one morning and find that the government owns the farm and the house and the car and has a mortgage on the church, legally. Historically, whenever any nation has taxed its people more than 25% of their national income, initiative was destroyed and that nation was headed for economic eclipse.
The game is equality between all people and the elimination of social classes.
Porque cuando todos tengamos y seamos más iguales, ¿verdad? El paso al socialismo, que es eso justamente, no se va a sentir siquiera en la sociedad. Porque poquitos van a ser los afectados y en poquita escala, porque ya la diferencia entre los ricos y los grandes la hemos ido cesando.
Lo que se tratan es de crear una bolsa de gente eternamente parada, eternamente dependiente del gobierno. Es decir, los regímenes comunistas son un fracaso económico, pero son un éxito político. Pues cada vez hay más gente que depende del gobierno.
21 millones de personas que cobran dinero del Estado, según datos de la Secretaría de Trabajo, sobre una población total estimada en casi 44.500.000 personas. ¿Se entiende esto? Es decir, que casi la mitad de la población argentina termina dependiendo directa o indirectamente del Estado.
La pobreza en nuestro país se ubicó en un 42% de la población argentina, mientras que un 10,5% se encuentra en situación de indigencia.
If you ask government for extra services, government, in order to perform its increasing function, has to get bigger, right? And as government gets bigger, in order to support its increasing size, it has to what? Tax the individual more, so the individual gets littler. And to collect the increased taxes requires more tax collectors, so the government gets bigger, and in order to pay the additional tax collectors, it has to tax the individual more, so the government gets bigger and the individual gets littler. And the government gets bigger and the individual gets littler until the government is all-powerful. The individual is hardly anything at all. The government is all-powerful. The people are cattle.
Vos podés venir acá y comer esta porquería, ¿sí? Porque te lo da el Estado.
In socialist societies, it is the government who own and operate the means for production, i.e. land, natural resources, factories, etc.
Al Estado le interesa lo social, la gente, la mayoría, los pobres. El Estado tiene que ser todo, planificador, empresario, inversionista, regulador, banquero, benefactor, promotor, tiene que serlo todo. Porque el único interesado en resolver los problemas sociales es el Estado.
Government is a very poor investor, and always has been. There are countless examples.
Vamos a seguir comiendo nuestras reservas y las reservas nos las vamos a seguir usando. Reservas es para nuevas empresas públicas, es para nuevas industrias.
Economic growth comes from entrepreneurs risking their own money, not from politicians risking your money.
El Estado tiene que tomar medidas para mejorar la calidad de vida de esos pobres, de eliminar su pobreza. El Estado
This game has been played many times with many programs. But this is for the poor. When it's all over, someone else has got the money.
Pasa a ser de la República.
El pueblo venezolano cada día se alimentará más.
Con estas nuevas adquisiciones, el régimen se apoderó de gran parte de la producción, importación y distribución de alimentos, para desgracia de los venezolanos.
A veces hasta lloro porque mi hija se para en la mañana y me dice, mamá, que vamos a desayunar y no tenemos nada que darle a nuestros hijos.
Bastaron solo 8 años para que desapareciera, y así los venezolanos se quedaron sin bicentenario y sin comida.
Entonces, ¿qué es lo que estamos haciendo en el gobierno desde el año 2006? Estamos dando la base material para la construcción del socialismo. Pero si no existe una base económica sólida, no se puede hablar de construcción ni siquiera del socialismo clásico. Este programa de transición, por lo tanto, lo que está haciendo es sentar las bases, la base material, para la construcción de la superestructura en la sociedad.
Material things are going to be used up and wear out, whether there's a war or not. Western Europe after World War II, everything that was there was bombed. And so it's really the ability to reproduce them, to operate those things, to maintain them, and then reproduce them was necessary. That's the real wealth. And so when you destroy the physical wealth, the economy gets restored often in a very few years. You really haven't done as much as if you destroyed the human capital. True among nations. Spain, for example, during its heyday in the 16th, 17th century, it received gold and silver literally by the ton, something like 200 tons of gold. If you can imagine, gold is normally measured in ounces. And so Spain didn't have to develop its human capital, and it didn't. It bought whatever it wanted because they had all of this. But when all of that money was spent and the colonies broke free and so on, Spain had nothing. And so Spain is today one of the poorest countries in Western Europe.
His great error, his real mistake, was to imagine that the Industrial Revolution of the 19th century, all those railways and dark satanic mills and factories and turbines and in the beginning of electricity represented the final human achievement in productivity. So in the future, what would matter is not the creation of wealth, but the redistribution of wealth.
En Venezuela hay una sola verdad: empresa tomada, empresa arruinada. La empresa Kellogg's anunció el cese de sus operaciones en el país.
Se la hemos entregado a los trabajadores y la empresa está produciendo.
Vamos a reactivar la planta en el día de hoy.
4 meses después, ¿qué sabemos de las Zucaritas?
Classic example, in the 1970s, Uganda decided that the Gujaratis from India were just too wealthy and controlled too much of the economy. They sent them out and they wouldn't let them take their wealth with them. And so the Gujaratis arrived mostly in England, destitute. And the Ugandan government has taken over all this material stuff. Over a period of a relatively few years, the Gujaratis were prosperous in England and the Ugandan economy collapsed, because they didn't have people who could do what the Gujaratis were doing. And so they no longer had the same production. All you can confiscate is the material wealth. You cannot confiscate the human capital.
So the true wealth, the enduring wealth, the wealth that leads to wealth in the material world is between people's ears.
Absolutely.
When government grabbing private businesses created shortages of almost everything. Why did you leave your country?
This is like the apocalypse.
Capitalism assumes that all the available knowledge can be used by a single central authority. It overlooks that the modern society, which I now prefer to call the extended order, which exceeds the perception of any individual mind, is based on the utilization of widely dispersed knowledge. And once you are aware that we can achieve that great utilization of available resources only because we utilize the knowledge of millions of men, it becomes clear that the assumption of socialism that a central authority can command all this knowledge is just not correct.
Imagined an enlightened republic ruled by philosopher kings. On the island of Laputa, scientists and social planners pursue extravagant and useless schemes while neglecting the practical needs of the people below. Think back to the perfect world you imagined. Did you also imagine what it would take to achieve? How would you make people cooperate? And how would you make sure it lasted? Now take another look. Does that world still seem perfect?
So where are the creative people in our society? We know that they're artists. So
they're starving in garrets.
Yeah, well, or are they working at McDonald's?
No, how about Bill Gates? He did all right. Steve Jobs, he did all right. Well, the entrepreneurs for sure. So people who start companies, they're the same people. They're the same people as artists. And, they're more gadget-oriented usually, but the temperamental predictors are exactly the same. And so I would say you find artists, creative people overrepresented among people who you might regard as failures over their life course, and radically overrepresented among people that you would regard as spectacularly successful. Mm-hmm. And that's the high-risk, high-return gambling strategy, essentially. And artists play exactly the same role in society. They're the visionaries that start to transform what we don't understand into at least what we can start to see. And they've always been that. They've always been at the vanguard. That's their biological niche.
So they're creating confidence for the community.
They're the civilizing agents.
The Creator stands on his own judgment. The parasite follows the opinions of others. The Creator thinks. The parasite copies. The Creator produces. The parasite loots. The Creator's concern is the conquest of nature. The parasite's concern is the conquest of man. The Creator requires independence. He neither serves nor rules. He deals with men by free exchange and voluntary choice. The parasite seeks power. He wants to bind all men together in common action and common slavery. He claims that man is only a tool for the use of others, that he must think as they think, act as they act, and live in selfless, joyless servitude to any need but his own.
As early as 1928, the communists declared that the racial differences among our people constituted the weakest and most vulnerable point in our social fabric. By constantly probing and straining at this one spot, they calculated that eventually the cloth could be torn apart and that Americans could be divided, weakened, and perhaps even set against each other in open combat. We mustn't kid ourselves into thinking that the communists have placed their agitators only into the black communities. They're working both sides of the street. They want hatred, violence, and bloodshed between the races, and they don't care how they get it or whom they use, even children if necessary.
Que nos plantea Fausto Reinaga, nosotros solo buscamos nuestra liberación. Fausto Reinaga dice que para dejar de usar el término indio lo vamos a hacer cuando nos...
El indio no es el problema, sino la actitud blanca, la sometedora, la cultura asesina del occidente. 500 años nos han dicho indios, nos han humillado, nos han masacrado.
Nos van a discriminar.
Según Fausto Reinaga y Ramiro Reinaga, la iglesia, la religión, solo nos ha traído problemas, nunca ha llamado al indio, solo ha llamado al blanco. El Inca debe servirnos de ejemplo. ¿Por qué? Porque para ellos no hay el odio, la envidia, el individualismo. Antes de que llegara el occidente a nuestra área, ya la tierra en pleno florecimiento. No había eso, no había el individualismo. La tierra era cuidada, había una cosmovisión donde nosotros nos comunicamos con la madre naturaleza.
The very idea that you should set aside your individuality for the community as a whole, which virtually always turns into an intolerant, hostile mob, is exactly why so many have died in socialist regimes. The very implication that the group knows what is good for the individual, that we exist to do things for the greater good, is totally antithetical to the purpose of being human. It's your job to find value in your work, to strive for more than you have, to bring good to yourself and the people around you, and to live as a free person as you see fit.
Kids are going to school and they're getting degrees, and when they come out of that school with it, they are met with the real world, and those kids will realize that they can't make any money. So they graduate college and they have no means to make money. You know what that turns them into? An angry person. A person that hates their country. Because look, they did everything right. They stayed in school and they can't make any money. This is the system that the Department of Education has intentionally created, because they know that what happens next is those kids that are super bitter and angry, they go out and they become the Antifa thugs that you see on the streets, the Black Lives Matter thugs that you see on the streets, the idiot professors that teach the kids the nothing that they know, That is what is happening right now in the education system. We are intentionally churning out useful idiots. The battle for future generations. If we do not win this battle, nothing else will matter. Nothing. None of the arguments, nothing will matter. If these kids grow up and they belong to the system, America will fall.
Never give a second thought to American citizens. You're the reason their money's worthless. You're the reason old people are eating out of garbage cans and kids get killed in bullshit wars. You're an ivory tower hoodlum.
Have you noticed that as everything around you seems to decline, one thing still grows? It is the power of your rulers. None of their plans and directives have solved your problems or made your life better. The only result has been their increased control over you at the cost of your freedom.
What if voting didn't mean anything anymore because both political parties stand for big government?
No party. There are no voices to offer an actual pro-capitalist, let's say fair, economic freedom and individualism. That is what this country needs today.
Sergei Nechayev. Now, you probably never heard of him. A big influence on Vladimir Lenin. He wrote a manifesto, the Revolutionary Catechism. What he lays out in a few short words is how to destroy a society. Because his whole thing is to bring man to paradise on earth. First, you have to make things so damn miserable. You have to reduce humanity to such a mess, such a state of distress, such a state of complete abject misery, so that they will revolt, so they'll have a revolution and establish the socialist paradise. So Nechayev's idea was to make man infinitely happy, you first have to make him infinitely miserable. So everything you see around us, from Black Lives Matter to critical race theory to the environmental movement, the radical gay movement, all of it is there to create chaos and misery and destruction. Because to a Marxist, only through chaos and misery and destruction can mankind ultimately achieve happiness and paradise on earth.
Think of classic socialism as essentially a strategy of Marxian division between the rich and the poor, loosely speaking. It's a class divide. Well, for the modern American socialist left, the divide in society is that, but it's not just that. It's also a race divide, black against white. It's a gender divide, male against female. It's a sexual orientation divide, straight against gay and transgender. And it's also an immigration divide, legal against illegal. Now, why are they doing this? They're doing this because they think that if we divide society in these 8 different ways, we can assemble a majority coalition of aggrieved victim groups that can come together and then sort of take on everybody else. So they're trying to get to 51% in the firm belief that democracy itself will then legitimize them looting and oppressing the other 49%. This is what they call democratic socialism. To me, it's a form of gangsterism.
Christians, American constitutionalists, they sort of have this wacky belief that you make things better for people and people get happier. And that makes them want to make things better for everybody else and better for themselves and their families. And you keep on building and progressing, and you start out with maybe a poor society, maybe an oppressed society, and you gradually expand prosperity and freedom, and people get happier and more contented and lead more fulfilling lives. That's the Western view. That is the traditional Christian, Judeo-Christian view. It's a view that most people on the planet hold. You start out in life, you keep on working on yourself and your surroundings to make them better all the time. And although it is not a straight line to progress, you're always aiming to make things better.
When that early pioneer turned his eyes toward the West, he didn't demand that somebody else look after him. He didn't demand free education. He didn't demand a guaranteed rocking chair at eventide. He didn't demand that somebody else take care of him if he got ill or got old. There was an old-fashioned philosophy in those days that a man was supposed to provide for his own and for his own future. He didn't demand a maximum amount of money for a minimum amount of work. Nor did he expect pay for no work at all. Come to think of it, he didn't demand anything. That hard-handed pioneer just looked out there at the rolling plains, stretching away to the tall green mountains, and then lifted his eyes to the blue skies and said, "Thank you, God. Now I can take it from here."
If white immigrants can come to this country 50 years ago with nickels and dimes and no education, and come here and pool their little nickels and dimes and no education, and set up little stores, develop these stores into larger stores, develop this into an industry which creates job opportunities for whites. Since Lincoln was supposed to have freed the black man 100 years ago, and today the black man, according to the government economist, has spending power of $20 billion per year. We feel that with the black man spending $20 billion a year, not setting up any businesses, not creating any industry, not creating any job opportunities for his own kind, he's not in a moral position to point the finger today at the white man and tell the white man that he's discriminating against him for not giving him a job in factories that he himself set up. If the black man has $20 billion, and these so-called Negro leaders are such geniuses that they should use this same ingenuity to show the black people how to pool our wealth and set up something of our own. Instead of trying to change the white man in your mind and make you accept us, we change the mind of the black man and make him accept himself. And as soon as he accepts himself, he'll solve his own problem. He won't be trying to force himself into your factory and into your bedroom and into your kitchen.
While Marxists, inspired by Nechayev, had the opposite view. Humanity is corrupt, society is corrupt. Only by destroying everything around you, bringing man to a state of abject poverty and despair and misery, then you can start to rebuild and create a happy man. Well, that's their philosophy, and it's been applied all over the world with shocking results, and we're still yet to see the paradise arising from the ashes. And guess what? We never will. Because people like Nechayev, they understood that yes, we will make man miserable, but there will never be a paradise for them. There may be for us. We will have the riches, we will have the wealth, we will have the power, but the common peasant, the common working man, he is only a means to our goals. And that's communism, folks. That is communism.
Why? Why has Western civilization been so successful? There are many reasons, but the best place to start is with the teachings and philosophies that emerged from two ancient cities, Jerusalem and Athens. Jerusalem represents religious revelation as manifested in the Judeo-Christian tradition, the beliefs that a good God created an ordered universe and that this God demands moral behavior from his paramount creation, man. The other city, Athens, represents reason and logic as expressed by the great Greek thinkers, Plato and Aristotle, and many others. Judeo-Christian religion posits that there are certain fundamental truths handed down to us by a transcendent being. We didn't invent these truths. We received them from God. The rules he lays down for us are vital for building a functioning, moral civilization and for leading a happy life. Greek thinking posits that we only know truth by what we observe, test, and measure. It is not faith but fact that drives our understanding and exploration of the universe. Western civilization, and only Western civilization, has found a way to balance both religious belief and human reason. Judeo-Christian tradition teaches that every human is created in the image of God. That is, each individual's life is infinitely valuable. This seems self-evident to us now, but only because we have lived with this belief for so long. The far more natural belief is that the strong should subjugate the weak, which is precisely what people did in nearly every society in all of history. Only by recognizing the divine in others did we ever move beyond this amoral thinking toward the concern for human rights, democracy, and free enterprise that characterized the West. The Soviet Union, Communist China, and other socialist tyrannies rejected faith and murdered 100 million people in the 20th century. Much of the modern Muslim world has embraced faith, but rejected reason. It's noteworthy that when the Muslim world did embrace Greek reason from the 8th to the 14th centuries, it was a leading center for scientific advancement. So again, we need both Jerusalem and Athens, revelation and reason. And yet many want to reject both. These people call themselves progressives. Ironically, they want to take us backwards to a time when man was governed neither by reason nor faith, but by feeling, and therefore back to a time of moral chaos and disorder, of feeling over fact. It would be a fatal mistake to follow the progressives. Stick with Athens and Jerusalem.
Or maybe 10,000 years of recorded history. In all of that time, there was practically no economic growth, no increase in human rights and justice.
Kings and tyrants ruled. They confiscated property, took and kept slaves. They waged war for decades at a time.
Until around 1700, suddenly limited government and property rights and markets came into the world.
The result was a sudden increase in prosperity.
What was GDP per capita in the world? Well, it was this for almost all of history, and then it did this.
Americans are now 30 times richer than we were 200 years ago. It's hard to believe because we're constantly told.
The rich get richer and the poor get poorer.
The majority of Americans keep getting poor.
Fundamental assumptions of Western civilization are valid. How about that? You know, it's not... You think it's an accident? Oh, here's how you find out, okay? Which countries do people want to move away from? Hey, not ours. Which countries do people want to move to? Ours. Guess what? They work better. And it's not because we went around the world stealing everything we could get our hands on. It's because we got certain fundamental assumptions right. Thank God for that. After thousands and thousands of years of trying. And because of that, we've managed to establish a set of civilizations that are shining lights in the world. You know, now, you can be pretty damn filthy and still be a shining light in this world, right? Because if you look around the world at the state of governance in most places, it's like the most pathological, corrupt, and vicious thugs rule. And to stand out as an illuminated light against that background isn't so difficult. But nonetheless, you know, we're as good as it's got. And unless we can come up with something better, we should be very careful about messing around with that. So why don't we start with the assumption that we're doing something right? One of the things we're doing right, for example, is that we actually value the individual, right? The individual has intrinsic value in Western societies. Do you know how long it took people to formulate that as an idea? And how unlikely that idea is that poor you, you know, useless, powerless you, with all your damn faults, you're actually worth something. You're worth something to the point that the law has to respect you. God, we don't want to abandon that for some half-witted collectivism, which we're doing as rapidly as possible, because one of the things that characterizes the radical left types is they don't give a damn about you as an individual or about individuals at all. You're black or you're white or you're Latino or you're transsexual, you're homosexual or whatever. You're a group. You're a member of a group. And the only thing that matters is the group. Well, I can tell you, if the only thing that matters is the group, you bloody well don't matter very much. And then you got to ask yourself just exactly what sort of people are trying to set things up so it is that the individual doesn't matter very much. Well, it's the sort of people to whom the individual doesn't matter very much. And I might suggest that you don't elect them, and that when they attempt to take power, that you do everything you can to stop them.
That is democracy interpreted as majority rule. You will find it hard to find anybody who will say that if 55% of the people believe the other 45% of the people should be shot, that's an appropriate exercise of democracy. What I believe is not a democracy, but an individual freedom in a society in which individuals cooperate with one another and in which there's an absence of coercion and violence. Now, it turns out that democracy, in the sense of majority voting, is an effective means for achieving agreement on some things, on things which are not very important. Really important things. We require much more than a simple majority. We require something as close to unanimity as we can get. That's why we have a constitution as well as legislative law.
It is precisely these trends which are bringing the world to disaster, because we are now moving towards complete collectivism or socialism, a system under which everybody is enslaved to everybody. And we are moving that way only because of our altruist morality.
Ah, yes, but you say everybody is enslaved to everybody, yet this came about democratically, Hein. Free people in a free country voted for this kind of government, wanted this kind of legislation. Do you object to the democratic process?
I object to the idea that people have the right to vote on everything. The traditional American system was a system based on the idea that majority will prevailed only in public or political affairs, and that it was limited by inalienable individual rights. Therefore, I do not believe that a majority can vote a man's life or property or freedom away from him.
Our founding fathers here in this country brought about the only true revolution that has ever taken place in man's history. Every other revolution simply exchanged one set of rulers for another set of rulers. But only here did that little band of men so advance beyond their time that the world has never seen their like since, evolve the idea that you and I have within ourselves the God-given right and the ability to determine our own destiny. But freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same. And if you and I don't do this, then you and I may well spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it once was like in America when men were free.
I'm sorry, but I don't want to be an emperor. That's not my business. I don't want to rule or conquer anyone. I should like to help everyone if possible. Jew, Gentile, black man, white. We all want to help one another. Human beings are like that. We want to live by each other's happiness, not by each other's misery. We don't want to hate and despise one another. In this world there's room for everyone. The good earth is rich and can provide for everyone. The way of life can be free and beautiful. But we have lost the way. Greed has poisoned men's souls, has barricaded the world with hate, has goose-stepped us into misery and bloodshed. More than cleverness, we need kindness and gentleness. Without these qualities, life will be violent and all will be lost. Even now, my voice is reaching millions throughout the world, millions of despairing men, women, and little children, victims of a system that makes men torture and imprison innocent people. To those who can hear me, I say, do not despair. The misery that is now upon us is but the passing of greed, the bitterness of men who fear the way of human progress. The hate of men will pass and dictators die, and the power they took from the people will return to the people. And so long as men die, liberty will never perish. Soldiers, don't give yourselves to brutes. Men who despise you, enslave you, who regiment your lives, tell you what to do, what to think, and what to feel, who drill you, diet you, treat you like cattle, use you as cannon fodder. Don't give yourselves to these unnatural men with machine minds and machine hearts. You are not machines, you are not cattle, you are men. You have the love of humanity in your hearts. You don't hate, only the unloved hate, the unloved and the unnatural. Soldiers, don't fight for slavery, fight for liberty. In the 17th chapter of St. Luke it is written, the kingdom of God is within man, not one man nor a group of men, but in all men, in you. You, the people, have the power to create machines, the power to create happiness. You, the people, have the power to make this life free and beautiful, to make this life a wonderful adventure. Then in the name of democracy, let us use that power. Let us all unite. Let us fight for a new world, a decent world that will give men a chance to work, that will give youth a future and old age a security. By the promise of these things, brutes have risen to power, but they lie. They do not fulfill that promise. They never will. Dictators free themselves, but they enslave the people. Now let us fight to fulfill that promise. Let us fight to free the world, to do away with national barriers, to do away with greed, with hate and intolerance. Let us fight for a world of reason, a world where science and progress will lead to all men's happiness. Soldiers, in the name of democracy, let us all unite!